So our objective is to be able to shoot projectiles and get an explosion effect when the projectile hits something, including when we hit the enemy tower and when the enemy tower projectiles hit us. Hello and welcome back. Now let's take a look at our section plan and see how far we've come. Now we know we've created a tank. It can move throughout the world. We made an enemy turret class. We added fire functionality and projectiles, along with health, damage, and destruction in our game. Now we have winning and losing conditions, and we're displaying those with widgets to our HUD. Now the last item is to add our special effects, which means we need some smoke trailing behind our projectile, as well as some explosions and sounds. And there are going to be a couple other things that we add to spice up our game and make it look a bit more polished. Now in this video, we're going to handle some hit particles. These are special effects for when the projectile hits something. This is going to involve something called a particle system. So let's go back into the editor and take a look at the particle systems we have in our project. So I'm here in the editor. I'm going to go into the assets folder and effects. And here we have 3 effects. These are called particle systems. Now we have a hit effect, a death effect, and a projectile trail. Now let's go ahead and double click on P hit effect. And you'll see that here we have a particle system editor. And in this little viewport, we'll see this explosion happening over and over again. Now, luckily, this particle system has already been created for us, and it looks like a nice little explosion. And we would like to see this explosion happen as soon as the projectile hits something. So that is our goal for this video. So here in VS Code, I'd like to go back into our projectile class. So let's go into projectile.h, and I'm going to add a variable to this class, and this is going to be a particle system. Now this can be a private variable, and the type is going to be uParticleSystem, and it's going to be a pointer, and we can call this hit particles. Now I'm going to forward declare this, and I'm also going to give this a uProperty. So let's say uProperty, and I want to make this edit anywhere so we can set this from the blueprint for our projectile. And while I'm at it, I'm going to give this a category, and I'll place this in the category combat, since it's sort of related to our other combat variables. Now this is edit anywhere because we plan on setting this from within the blueprint, so we can go ahead and compile this. Now let's hop back in the editor, and I'm going to close out of my other blueprints and go into our actors folder here in blueprints, actors. Here's our BP projectile. Let's open that up and open the full blueprint editor. Now, let's take a look in the details panel. Remember, BP projectile self must be selected to see these overall variables. And here's our combat section, and we see hit particles. Now here we have a drop-down, and we can select particle systems since this variable is of type uParticleSystem. We're going to use the hit effect for our hit particles. So now we have a variable, and its value is set here in the projectile blueprint. So let's compile and save this. Now the next step is to actually spawn this particle system as soon as we've hit something, which means onHit is the perfect function to do this in. Now we need to know how to spawn particles, and uGameplayStatics has a handy function for that. It's called spawnEmitterAtLocation, and it says plays the specified effect at the given location and rotation, fire and forget. This is nice because we don't have to worry about removing it or deleting it. We just fire off this function. It spawns the particle system and takes care of cleaning it up for us, which is great. So let's take a look at the syntax. Now, there are a number of input parameters, but this function has a number of overloads. Now, since there are a number of versions of this function, let's go into VS Code and take a look at those different versions. Now, I'm going to open up projectile.cpp and take a look at the onHit function. Now, just down here at the bottom, I'm going to type uGameplayStatics spawnEmitterAtLocation, and as soon as I type the opening parentheses, its pop-up is showing me the input parameters I need to pass in, but we see one of 3, which means there are 3 different versions of this function, 3 overloads. I'm going to click the down arrow twice to take a look at this particular overload. Now, it takes a world context object, a particle system, and a location, and the remaining input parameters have default values, so they're optional. Notice the rotation parameter is set to 0 rotator. Now, if we like, we could set the emitter's rotation to the rotation of the actor by passing in getActorRotation. It's not too important, but I would like to spawn the emitter with the same rotation as the actor, so I'd like to use getActorRotation and pass that in, but the rest of these parameters are optional. So since we know we need to call spawnEmitterAtLocation to play a particle system, we can do this in the onHit function. We know the first parameter is a world context object, and we already know how to handle that. We know that it takes a particle system, and we have a particle system variable that we can pass in. We also know that we need a location and a rotation, and we know how to get those for a given actor using getActorLocation and getActorRotation. So since you have all of this information, I'd like you to use the uGameplayStatics function spawnEmitterAtLocation in the onHit function for the projectile class. So pass in this for the world context object, pass in the particle system itself, that new hit particles variable we created, and use the projectile's location using getActorLocation, and use the projectile's rotation using getActorRotation. Pause the video and spawn the emitter in the onHit function now. Okay, so I'm going to remove this line that we used just to take a look at the function overloads for this function. And I'm going to place this just before we destroy the actor. So if you placed it, say, at the end of the function, that's okay. The challenge was left open-ended for you, but we're going to place this just before we destroy the actor, because if we destroy the actor, then it doesn't make sense to spawn particles after that. So we're going to do this before we destroy the actor. So we're going to say uGameplayStatics spawnEmitterAtLocation, and first we need our world context object, which is going to be this. Next, we need our hit particles, followed by our actor's location, for which we're going to use getActorLocation. Next, we're going to pass in the rotation, for which we'll use getActorRotation. And now we're spawning the emitter at the location. Now, one thing I'd like to point out is that if my owner is a null pointer and we return out of this function early, well, it might be a good idea to just destroy the projectile there. So I'd like to remove this return statement and give this if statement its own body. We'll still return, but just before we return, we should be destroying the actor. So I'm going to call destroy here in this if check. And in fact, even if we fail all of the other checks here, checking the other actor, we don't want a projectile just lingering around in the world, so we should move this second call to destroy outside the if check. That way, we're destroying the projectile when it hits something no matter what. That way, we don't have lingering projectiles for any reason. Okay, and while we're being safe, we should notice that we're using hit particles here, which means we should check to see if the hit particles are set before we attempt to use them. Otherwise, we might be using a hit particles variable that has not been set, and we should not use null pointers. So we're going to place an if check here to see if hit particles is valid. And if it is valid, then it's safe to call spawnEmitterAtLocation here. All right, let's go ahead and compile this now. And with a successful compile, we'll hop back into the editor. And here's BP projectile. We have our hit particles set. So make sure that that is set before we test this out. Otherwise, we won't see anything. And if we hit play, we can wait for our go widget and then boom, check that out. We have clouds of smoke. We have hit particles being spawned. I'm going to go ahead and shoot at our enemies, and we'll see that they get spawned when we're hitting the enemies as well. Perfect. So in summary, we now have spawned some hit particles. We have explosions when our projectiles hit something in the world, and the next step is to have a smoke trail that follows behind the projectile as it's flying through the air, and we'll take care of that in the next video.